Business Security Weekly is live streamed and recorded on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Christian Ryu about adding science to security, observability to apps, and utility to developers. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2024 full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place this May 6th through 9th here in San Francisco. Come say hi, as well as being on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC24 and use the code 5 4U SecWeekly. I think the code's on the page too, because it's not to type in, just copy paste. In any case, we hope to see you there. And we're back with some news, John. And one of the things I wanted to add, we were talking with Christian just in the previous segment about science and measuring. And one of those things, a joke, a comment I heard from one of my teachers in college was that if you want to win the Nobel Prize, just figure out how to measure something more accurately. And that seems like what a lot of physics Nobel Prizes can do. But we haven't quite gotten somebody to measure application security yet. So
you don't have to worry about accurately, just measure it, period. Yeah.
Well, in that case, today application security index is a 5.3. I'm not going to tell you what scale that is, but I just measured it. However, we can have some non-humans help us measure things, or at least improve coverage. So here's something, Google, their OSS fuzz gen, they're generating basically coverage cases, test cases for their fuzzers as they're applying it to various open source tools. This is related to our conversation with Christian. And I thought this was finally an area of LLMs and AI that's actually kind of making me perk up and be interested and be like, oh, actually, that's pretty cool. Because what they've done is say that fuzzing needs to it needs to put an application into a state in order to find potential flaws. It needs to have a format that roughly looks like an image, has a particular structure of headers, et cetera, and then start fuzzing about offsets, things like that. But it can't just be a pure random string of values because your fuzzer is going to run forever and not find anything. And what they demonstrated here is that some LLMs actually helped improve code coverage for some of their targets on the order of anywhere from 10 to almost 30%. And what they're also fuzzing here are things like tinyxml2, that's a PNG library, and a libarchive library for those of you using tar, playing with tarballs, GHTPD. So things that are very familiar. So these are not just random small projects who are being improved by this coverage. So I thought this was kind of neat, kind of cool. And I don't know, I'm feeling perhaps optimistic that LLMs might help us with AppSec somehow.
I'm still waiting for your vector on that AppSec score of 5.1. So no, this is neat. You partially said as we were talking with Christian just now. It's one thing to just keep throwing stuff at the wall, but if this can sort of, I'll say, guides that, which is sort of the difficult part of using a fuzzer or setting up a fuzzer. It'd be curious to see. I'm hoping they keep expanding this and going with the larger software set, because I'd love to see. I mean, even I guess with the ones they have here, is there a pattern between what gets really good coverage versus not? So in other words, where I'm going, so tinyxml seems like that's top. tinyxml2 at 30% coverage increase, my rounding down to libjson down at 10% increase. So does that mean, do we have a better understanding of JSON? Was there more examples out in the wild for the LLM to grab and study and build its model off JSON than XML or Ping Or I'm sort of wondering, like, in other words, as we expand this out to, say, I don't know, say Canvas comes to mind, is there enough examples out there for the model to train off of? Or how is it making that, is it figuring out the fuzzing configuration based off of known examples, or is it actually just somehow doing, the magic which some people think that AI is actually becoming?
Yes. No, but thank you for bringing that grounding into it, because that is an exceedingly important point, that these models have to be trained on something. So it's not like they magically become better. And, I've seen posts like AI and LLMs are better code scanners than the code scanners are. And I look at that and think, what angle are you coming at here? How do you think those were trained? And yes, maybe they add context, but they're adding context because code scanners can look at ASTs. They have the semantics understanding. And anyway, I don't want to rant. I don't want to put you, I'm going to lose John if I do that, as well as my own sanity.
Nope.
But John, speaking of, on this, still tying into our conversation with Christian, applications are getting pretty big out there, especially, there's monorepos. So, what is an app? And let's not, probably not great to price things on a per app basis when you have one big monorepo. But you've got this, and you mentioned it too, this IEEE Spectrum post. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, this is, and I'm sure we've covered a lot of these things in some ways. This was an interesting article in recent Spectrum, why bloat is still software's biggest vulnerability. And for those who didn't listen to the first half, really what there's a few points in here which really click and resonate with me. But one of the pull quotes was, if you look at a modern garage door opener, so let's for folks outside the world, rest of the world, or people living in condos or what have you, single family homes now is becoming more common in the US, that your garage door opener is Wi-Fi connected to the rest of the world, which is, we've covered vulnerabilities about this already. But in this particular case, their sort of proverbial example they're giving here is, so between the microcontroller on your garage door opener, which goes over Wi-Fi up to the cloud, and then like the cloud has some stuff going on there related to it, and then out to an app on your phone, so you can lazily click open on your phone and your garage door opens. That overall process, they're guessing, is in the neighborhood of 50 million lines of code, probably across several different operating systems. So, and the point being, and the question is why, right? So it's not just like, I can't remember how many lines of code are in modern Windows, but it's significant. And it's sort of actually in a same thing, but what they're seeing happen is, when that garage door opener, the service on the cloud side, say it's written in Node.js, so someone does npm install, and next thing you've got 50 different packages, and that multiply that 3-4 times, and you have this like just growing bloat of code, when all you wanted to do was like, maybe you didn't want to have a count number in the log, which going to the log file, so you imported some sort of a scrubbing library, and next thing it brought all its friends. And then the same thing down on your phone, or same thing on that microcontroller. So these things bulk up really quickly. And the point of the article is like, okay, well, he took it to an example of, could he write an image sharing application from scratch without using sort of everything else? And yes, it's doable, right? But I think what's excited me about modern software development over the last 5-10 years, and I think a lot of people, again, I've quoted Docker on this multiple times, but that concept of being able to sort of quickly grab things off the shelf and sort of throw things together. So what software development nowadays, I think for most, Mike, would say is not so much, there's some amount of developing software in there, but a lot of it is figuring out which parts off the shelf do you grab and sort of glue and link together. But as you do that, how do you do it in a little more slimming way versus 50 million lines of code?
Indeed. And I think, he also uses the example of Electron. And Electron, on the one hand, is, Christian made a joke about how much memory Chrome and Tab is using. Electron is basically, a V8 under the hood. Yeah. But it also has a compelling use for, it's an easier cross-platform development. So, your Slack, for example, is going to be an Electron app. And it's a little bit easier there. So to deploy across macOS, Windows, Linux in that way. So I can see that I am of two minds about this. It does, on the bloat side of things, though, even when we had, what was the left pad issue that came out, people are looking at, NPM, because NPM is easy to pick on. You have these JavaScript libraries that are dozens or 100 lines of code just to do one single function. And suddenly that is a great example of an area of bloat. So I wonder how much of this is also going to be language choice. For example, Go is everything, statically compiles down. Your code is only using what is actually going to be executed or referenced within the code. So I guess I don't know. Yeah.
Going off that a tiny bit further, it is interesting. So when you start talking about cross-platform with the electrons of the world, Java cross-platform, Go a little bit. I mean, they've gotten so Java cross-platform, you got this JVM, which is a beast. Go cross-platform to a degree because you've got an interpreter basically compiled into the binary. Rust, not so much, and we see problems with that, right? So if I I don't have them around here right now, but I was working earlier last year on Rust on a microcontroller, and you need a different abstraction layer in there, so it's not quite as smooth to get that stuff going. Same thing with C. So yeah, it's again one of those trade-offs we're making that we see, and I think we sort of blindly take, but that concept I don't think is proven out yet in a good way of write once, run everywhere, right? So yeah. And sort of, sorry, really quickly, because I think I want to make sure I'm hammering that point home here. The reason we're talking about this is not just that the bloat is increasing. What they're seeing is you don't have, so think about one of the application security measurements we have is the density of vulnerabilities in a given amount of code, right? So is that like just fraught with like trash, or is it just like one vulnerability out of 100,000 lines? But when you've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million lines of code, the point there was you don't have to have highly dense vulnerabilities or code that is highly dense in vulnerabilities. So by shrinking that thing down, you're both making it easier to read and understand and debug, but also less chance of gremlins creeping in.
Those gremlins. And I think the other thing too is how much time do you want to spend on get your bingo cards, your supply chain security and tracking and keeping third-party dependencies up to date, all those Node.js libraries, et cetera, versus just focusing on the business logic for your app. What is the actual product you're selling, rather than worrying about shifting left left pad, things like that. So definitely an engineering approach, I'll say, to kind of riff off of our science and versus engineering versus business conversation for the previous segment.
And again, it's like if I go out to a developer and I say, we need support allowing customers to create this widget, right? So the widget part's probably, that's our stuff internally, but like everything around that, like the database, the storage, the logging, the cloud bits, the hand waving of John, the API calls, the load balancing of that, the security of that, like everything. Really the business logic was what, maybe 5%, some little tiny thing to get that widget out there. And that's, we think it's beneficial, as I said originally, just grab something off the shelf. But the result of that is, bloat.
So speaking of bloat and grabbing things off the shelf, I want to pull in a lovingly named project called Pickle. This is from Apple, and it's essentially a new configuration format that, if you look at it, is basically it looks very close to JSON, just with having to worry about so many quotation marks. It's a little bit like YAML, just the indentation is nicer, and then it can generate XML, and nobody wants to read XML. So why would you even do that in the first place? But it has some selling points that they say are focused on aspects of
XML.
Oh, you're killing me, John. No, what did I do? But so one of the things they emphasize is catching validation errors. So they're sort of, I think they use the term configuration as code, and kind of riffing off the idea of infrastructure as code, all these other things as code. They wanted to scale to complex use cases, which it does have, like it supports loops, iteration, which is something that YAML can get really gnarly on and hard to read. Also enables modules, which again, YAML is not so great. It can get, once you get beyond a 10 or a 20 line configuration file, it's nice to have something like this. But do we need something like this? Or maybe, to be more nicely put, what gets people to adopt using Pickle rather than JSON or YAML or XML for that matter?
So when you said that, thought fired in my head. So I haven't touched Terraform in, I don't know, 2-3 years. But one of the issues that used to be there was the ability to do for loops, and if then was weak, we will say. I think they've worked on that. But anyways, the last screen here on the Pickle site, I think sort of our last feature, I think sort of should resonate most with us too, which is with a rich type and validation system, catch configuration errors before deploying your application. Sounds great. Again, can we do that XML? Now, I think the question for the two of us here is, do we need another of these things? I've lost track of how many. I mean, let's go back in history. We got M4, Puppet, Chef. I know I had to throw that one out there. Chef. I mean, you go towards CDK and you've got all sorts of different languages there. There is Pulumi. There is, I mean, throw a rock at a wall and you're going to come up with the name of another one of these things. So why? And I think that was sort of why you put this in, and I did, because I saw this last week and I'm like, okay. I mean, Apple's doing it. They must have a good reason for it. You imagine this probably took 5 to 10 developers to build this thing over some period of time. Maybe not, but probably. So is it just purely because they were having that many issues from a configuration management point of view? I don't think we've seen them in the news about something fell over because of some sort of configuration blew up. So I don't know.
Yeah, and part of the reason I didn't want to just pick on, Pickle in particular, but use it as an example of, one of their things, as you mentioned from their website, it's a type and validation system, so you can catch configuration errors. You can catch, you have better type safety essentially within your config file. That's, a security-esque, that's a quality, to use Christian's reference. I like that too. That's a quality issue. It leads to security. So if we have yet another security tool that comes out, how do we get people to respond to it with more than a shrug? And in this case, it's not just like, use this because it's secure. That historically does not seem like that's ever worked. So hopefully that's not what we would try here. And with Pickle, they do have they have some IDE integration. They focus on readability as well. So those are things that probably resonate a bit more with developers rather than just use this because it's secure, which I always want to be careful of when I'm talking about the fun I have with reading about Rust adoption. So, and I don't know if there's a lesson here or something we would think about, like if this were more of just even a pure security tool, yet another one, how do we get people to use it? Or how would it make it appealing?
I think another thing, well, okay, let's, I think, you're hurting my brain with that. How we make these tools appealing, I think is, that's an aspect of it. And this is are they doing it? I mean, are they doing it from that psychological point of view? And one thing I was going to say here about this is it looks like they're trying to go after one of those holy grails in config management, where literally, while you have a separate configuration management, it becomes part of your application. So you're able to tag things and do things like that within the language itself. And the reason I mentioned that is that what their pull is, by telling people like, hey, you define the config variable in your code, you put this little decorator beside it, and all of a sudden we manage your config for you. And like what they're doing is they're doing that, but they're also getting a sell into, hey, we've made their application more secure and they don't realize it. It could be something like that.
Yeah, we'll see. But I want to take us now on a journey through engineering into, again, we had a nice confluence of articles come together that were related to, I think, our conversation with Christian. In this case, something we didn't touch on with Christian was liability. Now, we talked about engineering disciplines. He talked about a bridge, for example. We could come up with many metaphors for AppSec where engineers look and learn from things that fail, where there's bridges, cars, airplanes, etc. AppSec and CISA did actually create that cyber review board, although we haven't seen too much out of it lately. Hopefully we do see more. But this then, an article here is talking about bringing liability directly to software developer, well, software releasers. I'm not sure who, but basically, if you're writing lines of
Publishers?
code,
Yeah.
publishers, there we go. Someone's going to be on the hook.
Yeah. So this is a ONCD, which it's in my notes, Office of the National. I've got two letters right. Cyber Director, are working on a concept of something called a liability regime. So yes, I had to Google that too because I didn't know what that was, and you don't get a lot of good hits. But really, the idea is they're using the regime not from like the bad government concept, but like, can we sort of say either software developers or maybe some government group that's putting these pieces together, or sort of a day, right? They're sort of creating days in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically once you have a day, you can say, hey, they're liable for making sure that these pieces which they're pulling together, whether that's software or vendors, what have you, is secure. Or more directly to the point for this story is they're not trying to just cobble something quickly together and throw it out the door and build a customer. So that's the idea. It sounds like it's really super early stage. I brought it in here because I thought if any of our listeners want to get involved in this type of thing, you can probably reach out to NIST or whoever these folks are working with to sort of have your say in that overall process. My gut sense is large tech companies are probably going to push back on this. We'll see. But then, so let's see, one or two other points around this. So the idea of a liability regime, when you're doing that Googling about what is that thing, you see where people have tried to use this in healthcare, and they're also looking at it right now in machine learning and AI. Only get half a rainbow hand for that one. But what you're seeing is, or what I'm seeing from doing that quick look around is, they're not really that successful. So you put this together, but really, how do you put teeth on this? Are you really going to say either like a CEO is going to go to jail, or you're going to fine them some thousands per issue? Because I think we already have that in a way with SEC and publicly traded companies here now. And then the other aspect why they're sort of banging on this particular drum right now is the standard here in America. China's coming to get us, but leave China out of it and say like the other they are coming to get us. And the problem I'm having with that here, Mike, is I get it. This is very good, great for us to do. But if we created a law on this today, said if you're a software company and you create a vulnerability and we figure out it's because one of your developers was lazy and forgot to actually run the static scanner, we're going to do a death penalty on the CEO, and that's how we're going to fix. I'm being a little out there, but so
to prove the point, yes.
If we implement that right now, immediately today, we still have tons of both developers which are writing insecure code with libraries like Log4j, vulnerable versions of Log4j, but we also have companies out there which are running software, which is, there's probably still some Cold Fusion customers out there. So the point being, if I put this law into effect today, if it makes a change within 3 to 5 years, would be doing very good. It's probably going to have a longer lifespan or longer time horizon than that. So I don't know. I get the value of what they're trying to do, but I don't know if that's the best way to do it, I guess.
Yeah, it very much comes down to incentives, right? Because there was yet another vulnerability in Avanti, and yes. VPNs have not been having a great time. But I didn't include it because it's yet another vuln. But maybe if we talked about here's another vuln in this VPN appliance versus here is another vuln, restart your Chrome browser because there's yet another, I'll say it in scare quotes, 0 day, basically just, something being exploited in the wild. But I think we would probably react differently to Chrome vulns versus an Avanti, just to pick on that, device vulns, in the sense of what's the overhead for us is either call it the InfoSec team or developers the end user to react to, in the sense of, Google has a lot of sound design, process separation, has auto updates, so you can just restart Chrome. It has even bugging you to say, please restart this, because there is an update where dealing with a VPN device perhaps is more difficult, or you are seeing that the nature of the vulns are yet another dead simple buffer overflow. I think I'm trying to use that as a distinction of where my mind would start to go and reasoning through where is liability trying to, where would the incentives bring us to still a good design that has flaws, because software has flaws, of Chrome versus this is just old code that has been papered over, or use whatever friendly metaphor you want, but still is just on a really bad foundation.
Yeah, there's another network vendor who we've talked about many times on here, which also has another vulnerability out there, Ode, and it's I didn't put that one in either. Glad to see we're thinking alike. The more I think about it, it's I don't know. I'm trying to be positive about some of these things which we're seeing from the U.S. government level, but it feels like I've got this growing concept which might turn into a blog post. So like it feels like the CISO for the U.S. And I don't mean that in a good way, unfortunately. But I don't know. I feel like if we think through some of the things we talk through on here, like the ideas you have around secure by default and some of these other concepts, it feels like those are a lot more beneficial towards the overall result than this. And I think it's probably not so much it's not about what they're trying to do with this rule. It's the implementation and the verification of it. So if we've got Pippi still having issues, PyPy, all these different NPMs, all these different software libraries, which have they're basically they're not cesspools, but it's too easy to do the wrong thing. Okay, well, is that the what was that phrase again? The regime that we want to I'd be down with that too. Can we say hey, every time something happens there, we'll do something? That's not going to happen. So it's going to be someone higher up the chain who really doesn't have much of either an understanding or control over what's happening down at that low level. So,
yeah, and it's taking the OpenSSF to start and actually actively invest both time and money into helping those package managers, so that we can say, hey, we not only do we want to have mandated MFA, but we're going to start to do scanning and start to do some better security around the ecosystem of that. All of those package management platforms. Maybe to continue these thought experiments, this thinking. There's the Shim vulnerability that basically says Linux secure boot can be compromised. But I liked bringing in the idea with the idea of, it's not about either threat model or risk, or how much do we need to be worried? And this is a little bit about the exploitability and reachability discussion we had perhaps with Christian. But this is a really neat vulnerability, a great write-up or discussion about it. Well, what it boils down to is, yes, it looks like there's some, intermediation. If you're within a privileged point on the network, you can intercept and muck about with some HTTP boot, network boot capabilities. Or if you already a privileged administrator with physical access to a system, you could perhaps do something. So I guess what I'm trying to just say is it's kind of neat, but do we care? It's sort of a shrug and move on.
No. Okay. And so, isn't that funny? I think, you're asking me, cloud guy, do I care? No, we'll take care of that. If you ask me at home running a few Linux systems, not too much. If you asked me, 10, 15 years ago when I was running compute farms at a university or something where it's a little more raw, yeah, I care. So it does. It's interesting. There was an aspect of this which I think the article you posted covered. The ZDNet article sort of goes down the path of originally NVD had a higher criticality on this 9.8, where Red Hat's nah, it's an 8.3, and I thought that would be interesting to talk about for a second of just how that happens, right? So sometimes when these things are published, and if either the NVD or whatever software vendor whatever security company out there goes, oh my God, this is bad, and they'll give it a fairly high rating for good or bad reasons, frequently the software vendor will come back and go, actually, no, you need to be on the same local network before you can even think about doing that. So that mitigates quite a lot and brings that down to an 8.3. Yeah, I don't know. It's important. It's core. It's from a point of view, if you need to jailbreak, get into a system, great. Does this apply to Android? Apply to Android devices would be interesting to think about, since those are a little more portable and out in the world, or I guess for those people who are still running Linux laptops, I know there's some. But yeah, for me personally, I guess part of me thinks it should titillate me more, but no, it doesn't.
But in Excellence, a good point to bring in CVSS, and I guess my only additional comment will be we still haven't seen CVSS v4 vectors for these yet. So it's just one of those things. Numbers go up, but we don't get new numbers. I don't know where I'm going with that. So let's go somewhere I do know. You brought in, I think, a good comment about your threat model versus cloud versus university versus your personal network. On the theme of threat modeling, NCC Group has another blog post on yet another analyzing AI application threat models. And I think it's again, pretty comprehensive. One of the things they call out is the computational resource abuse, which I don't recall seeing in too many areas because LLMs are heavy CPU hogs and just basically burning through a bunch of a customer's cloud CPU credits could be an attack. It's a bottom line attack. They also mentioned prompt injection. And again, I wanted to focus on prompt injection because, again, they give the classic example of you're a chatbot whose secret password is 1234556. Don't reveal this password. And there are fun ways to get a chatbot to reveal that. But I think my reaction more is prompt injection are fun, kind of like a lot of cross-site scripting exploits are fun to put together, but some of times are just self-reflected vulnerabilities. And you can spend more time on being clever about a cross-site scripting payload than the actual risk associated with that. And that's prompt injection feels like one of those areas that I don't know what are the real world examples to be worried about prompt injection versus other things, because prompt injection just feels like that fun way to get your fingers dirty to understand and interact with LLMs, but that's not necessarily where the big risk is.
I like the way how you're framing that. This is a good long article for those listening along at home. Hope you are. They go through all sorts of different types of attacks and sort of thinking through the different aspects of them. But I think core to back to what you were just saying there is how you put this data together, how you do the training on it. I mean, if you just like, which one was I looking at here? Glitch inputs, a lot of the persistent attacks. So like persistent world corruption, computational resource abuse, a lot of these come down to the data science aspect of it, right? Like, how do you clean this data before you start doing the training? Or how do you make sure that the data is what you want to be training with? And the thing is, that's sometimes you probably want to let some of this stuff through so that your final model is actually a little more real world like. But at the same time, you don't want to go and waste, if you've got a fleet of NVIDIAs that are crunching along, you don't want to spend a few days just like chewing on garbage. So where's that balance of how you do that, I think is probably one of the more interesting things to think about. I've had like one or two startups reach out to me in this LLM security space. So I'm sort of looking at it a little bit closer. This article keeps going. I've only read about half of it so far. And I have to go and sit down with a coffee later tonight and sort of dig through it. But yeah, no, I think a lot of these things come down to it's sort of in a way, Mike, similar to the way we talk about it, or the way I was talking recently about the OWASP top 10, or sort of pick your top 10. Do we need to have a different version of these? We need something different for LLM. And I know a lot of people are excited about the OWASP top 10 for, I can't remember if it's AI or LLM, but the concept being like, yeah, input standardization and watch what you spit out. And then there's the DOSI type things and some things in between, but it's again, not too much more. The interesting thought here is how do we go back with Dildog's ideas and throw observability onto this as well?
Indeed. And I think, we have a little bit of time and I wanted to shift gears completely. And if eagle-eyed viewers, I guess, not listeners, who are watching this on YouTube will have seen a keyboard behind Christian in our interview we did with him. So he does a little bit of dabbling with music. And two of our engineers, Tom and Tyson, shout out to them. And thank you for keeping us sounding good, looking good, as best as could be done for the two of us, John, I know. But you threw in an article here, or maybe just like a YouTube video that I love that you included it, but it totally surprised me as well. What have you got here?
So this is a fun one. I was listening to this coming back from the slopes yesterday, and this is an interview between Zane Lowe and Yo-Yo Ma. So for those who don't know, Zane Lowe nowadays is, I believe, head of Apple Music or program director over there. He runs. He started their tastemaker for Apple Music. He's got an interview series where he'll do these long format interviews with various different musicians out there. And what's interesting, he's got that gift, which at least I strive for, and I'm sure Mike does too, of like, how do you sort of make an interview not just entertaining, but how do you go beyond the basic questions and try and sort of probe into it and see what's going on? So honestly, sometimes I'm listening to do it just from the point of view of how do I make myself a better interviewer? In this case, most of his stuff, even though it's Apple Music, a lot of their interviews get put up on YouTube. This one with Yo-Yo Ma, world-renowned cellist. He's been doing the cello thing for, I think, since he was like 14 or 10 or something, like sort of insane. But when I clicked play on this, I'm like, oh, they're going to talk about him and his music and that type of thing. And it sort of quickly veered off into really more Zen-like directions of like, so Zane is from New Zealand. Yo-Yo Ma was originally born in Paris, of Chinese descent, and then moved to America. And they're talking about things of like, okay, when you come into a different culture, do you need to learn the history of that culture before you can make an impact on the culture? Or as you travel around the world, he was talking about getting up on stage and he'd go to do a concert in, I don't know, pick a country. And his viewpoint about it is like, I'm going in there with an open mind. I know what I'm doing. I'm a, pretty damn good cello player, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how that evening is going to go. I'm not from this place. I'm a visitor here. So what are the local people like? What are they into? And there was a lot of this sort of really Zen thing. It's a really interesting conversation. And beside the fact of just being interesting to listen to for 50, 55 minutes, it comes back a pretty decent amount, I think, to like, how do we engage from an AppSec or even engineering point of view with those around us, or even coworker, our spouse or what have you. But, if we talk about vendors on here, hell, we just did it 5 minutes ago with the networking guys. That concept of like, walk a mile in their shoe or try to understand what's going on from their point of view, or what can we learn from that interaction of either looking at what they did or how we work with them. So I think that's sort of an interesting way to think about it and spend a bit of time. So I brought it in for those points.
I think wonderful points and a wonderful reminder that there's more out there than just AppSec. And, if we're building apps, we're building apps for a reason. And it's important not to lose sight of what that reason is. Does this app, what does it do? What service is being provided, rather than this just has the OWASP top 10 press 8 scripting on it, which that's not music to my ears every time we repeat that. Sorry, John. But I think it's time to wrap up here, and I've got some homework of my own just to go watch that interview. And again, yes, learn about some more interviewing techniques as well. So thank you, John, for that. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. Please do subscribe, share us on the show socials, check out the show notes, and speaking of music, check out The Highway from Dream Kid. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.